And after our 2-3 months of adventure so far, that was the thing that broke me. I just burst out into tears in that moment. And we were kind of coming to terms with the fact that our friend was dead, because there was literally no other scenario. There was no other paths.
Amen and amen. Alex, what do you have to say about the situation?
Pretty rad.
Nice.
Hey creators, Eamon here, and this is where I explore my creative philosophies through video. And today we are talking about the most challenging thing that I have ever done. So what is the most challenging thing that I have ever done? Well, in short, late in 2019, I did a 5-day hike in the Dolomites, followed by a 7-day music festival in Croatia, followed by an 8-day hike in Switzerland to end up at the Matterhorn. Yeah, that's right. To start with, I'll give you a little bit more context about the trip as a whole, how I was feeling at the start of it, and then we'll jump into what it looked like and how I felt at the end. So please stick around because I have no doubt you'll get some amazing value out of it. So early last year, I didn't really have my life together. I was running a business, I was doing a couple of different things, but nothing was really set in stone. And I was trying to make a couple of different changes in my life and trying to take a different direction when all of a sudden my friend George hit me up, who lives in Canada, and he said, hey man, we're doing a huge Europe trip and we're gonna include this music festival that he's wanted to go to for a long time. Why don't you come along? And at the start I was like, no, there's no way, I don't really have the money for it right now and I'm not sure what my life's looking like. And him and a bunch of my other friends was kind of egging me on, telling me, hey man, you really should come, like it's gonna be an awesome experience. And the year before I went to Canada and did a 3-day hike, and that was pretty intense. So I kind of had a bit of an idea of what I could be in for. Oh, was I wrong? So months went on and it finally got to the time when I had to make a decision. It was about a couple of weeks before the flights were gonna double in price and everything was gonna get locked off. There was only limited spots in some of the cabins that we were staying in, on top of the mountain and that kind of thing. And something inside me was like, no, you have to do this. You don't know when this opportunity will come around again, especially because I'm usually the one organizing the trips, and when someone else organizes it, it's like, yep, okay, get me on board for sure. So the trip was about a month in Canada, going to Chamblin Music Festival, hanging out with my friends there, and then going on to Europe for 2 to 3 months and doing a whole bunch of different crazy stuff. But we're gonna zoom in here on the 8-day hike in Switzerland. So if you wanna know a little bit more about the trip and some of the crazy things that happened on that trip, Berlin is all I'm gonna say there. If you're watching this and you were a part of that trip, you know what I'm talking about, and you can check out the MetaMinds podcast that I have on that. The link will be in the description to that. To characterize some of my friends, they are adventure in a nutshell. They strive for glory, to quote one of my friends directly. And to the 30 people that may actually watch this video, you'll probably get a real kick out of some of this. To a lot of people that don't get the references, I'm sorry, okay? Enjoy the B-roll though. So most of the B-roll is going to be from the Dolomites hike. My friend Byron was there. Shout out to you, man. You got so much good drone footage and some gimbal footage as well. I literally just had my A7 III and I was snapping photos most of the time. So there is a little bit of footage from the Matterhorn hike, but it's predominantly the Dolomites hike. So everyone that was on this 8-day hike has done many, many multi-day hikes before. And at the start I was like, yeah, why not? Like, you know, someone's organizing the trip, like 8-day hike with the boys, it'll be chill, like it's gonna be fine. You know, I survived that 3-day hike, it's just a little bit of walking, right? And I didn't really prime my expectations. I didn't really think too much about it. I just kind of went along with it, bought the flights and, you know, ended up there. And it wasn't until that first day of hiking that I really realized what I was in for.
Do that again! Bird's coming out. Nice. Oh, that's pretty rad.
Whoa, shooting videos takes a long time. So initially we had 7 people on the Dolomites hike, and then about 30 of our friends came to the music festival in the middle, and then there was 6 guys on the Matterhorn hike. So we kicked off the hike in Italy, and it was relatively chill. There was maybe only 1 or 2 big days where you're kind of really mentally struggling. You know, you're getting to the 5-6 hour mark, and you've got 1 or 2 hours to go, and it starts raining, and you don't even have proper gear to actually wrap everything up in. And you've got your camera out, and you've got a whole pack on and everything like that. You've got hiking poles and that kind of thing. And you know, you don't really have the proper rain jacket, it's at the bottom of your bag. And so all these things kind of pile up. And I quickly realized that it was not a physical game, it was a mental game. So the Dolomites hike, we stayed in 2 different refugios, and that was such an amazing experience. On the top of the mountain, you know, only other people that have done the hike are around you and nobody else around. We got 3-course dinners, and it was just a phenomenal experience. Seeing some of the sights we saw, capturing some of the footage and photos that we captured, and doing it with the guys that I did it with, it just felt like camaraderie at its finest. You're all in this together and you're all kind of trudging through this thing. And you know, they might all say that it was easy, but I definitely saw everyone struggling at times. And it definitely kind of brings you all together when you're doing something really difficult that you've decided to do together. And you're in this thing and you have to keep each other's spirits high. You have to keep your own spirits high. You have no idea how long is left some days. You could be walking for 3 hours. You could be walking for 5 hours. Then all of a sudden you see a sign that says you've only got 1 hour left. And it turns out that you've actually got 3 hours left, and you just would not know for the life of you, because you know, we had maps and stuff, we had it all planned out, but things change. And when you're there, when you're hiking, doesn't matter how detailed you've looked at the map previously, you know, things can be different and you will run into the unexpected. And when you get there, that's when you really see your true self, because that's when you really have to face the actual challenge. You can only mentally prepare so much. And part of the real challenge was, you know, as I mentioned on the Dolomites hike, like we were hiking for 5 days, but in the middle there, we stayed in a really nice town and got quite a good rest. Well, some of us did. Am I right? Am I right?
Seb Doug, Is he gonna land?
And then the last couple of days, you know, ramped it up again. But it was initially really hard at the beginning and then tapered off. And so that kind of got me thinking, you know what, this hiking thing, it's quite easy. You know, like when you actually finally get to the end of it, and on that last day, it was raining so hard and all you wanted was like, just give me the end of the trailhead. I'm done, I don't care anymore. And then finally you get to the trailhead and then you have to wait in the rain for a bus for an hour to actually get to the town that you're going to. That's a whole different story. But that hike really gave me a good little taster for potentially what I was in for the Matterhorn. Yeah, there were some times in there where I wanted to give up. There were some times in there where I was rethinking my life, you know, stuck in my head, stuck in my own ego, just walking, just 1 foot at a time. But I've made it, you know, I'm out of this 5-day hike. And now I get to go to a music festival with music that I love in Croatia for 7 days. Like, it's all vibes from here, right? You know, everything's fun. And it kind of lowered my expectations for the next hike. You know, I came out on the other side, my hiking poles were intact, my legs were intact. And even that hike kind of reframed to myself what I was capable of, which if you've ever done something crazy challenging, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I challenge you to do something really challenging because it will reframe what you were capable of. And when you can do that, it makes you feel like you can do anything. And that feeling is really important if you are trying to achieve anything in life at all. I'll spare you all the details of the music festival and jump straight into the Matterhorn hike. One key thing that happened was that I got to hear some of my own music get played at this festival. It's called Outlook Festival, and that was an absolute honor. It was literally mind-blowing. In short, after dancing for 7 days straight and staying up all night for 7 days straight, we found ourselves on a train to Switzerland. And all you had to do was look around on the train and look at all the boys that were there, that were at a music festival with us, and we were all just exhausted. We really just needed 3 days to just sleep and relax by a beach somewhere, but we didn't have it because the next day we started the 8-day hike. So after a long train and a long, very local bus up an extremely windy mountain, we find ourselves at this Rifugio, which was probably the nicest place we stayed. And it was such a beautiful little Rifugio, the only one in the town actually. And the next day we were beginning this 8-day hike. And I had a chest infection from the music festival, along with 2 other guys. So not only was I about to embark on the biggest journey of my existence, I was also disgustingly sick. This Rifugio had a steam room and you should have seen the stuff that came out of me. It was not nice, but there was nowhere to go. I could not get out of this hike. You know, at that point in time, I wanted to get out of the hike, mainly because I was in no shape to be hiking for 1 day or 1 hour, let alone 8 days in a row. But nonetheless, we all rose in the morning and I had the hottest shower I've ever had and popped a bunch of painkillers, and we had a beautiful breakfast and we set out on day 1 of the hike. So to give you some context, we did about 20 kilometers every day with about 1 to 2 kilometers of elevation. And on paper, that sounds pretty chill, you know, but in practice, after day 1, I was pretty crushed and my health was only getting worse. Some of the other guys were getting a bit better, which was great, but I was about 40 minutes to an hour behind the last person that made it up the end of day 1. And when I got to the top and I purchased a cup of tea for about 12 Australian dollars, it was then that I realized that I was in this. This is my life, and it's going to be the biggest mental game that I've ever played. And this is just the beginning. That day, I believe we were hiking for about 8 or 9 hours, inclusive of a little bit of a break. And we probably averaged that every other day as well, except for one day, which was about 10, 12 hours. So day 2 and day 3 come around and, you know, I'm trudging through every single day, still with a chest infection, very slowly getting a little bit better. And, you know, extreme inclines and declines. I was in this foggy state. Like every step I took, I was like not, you know, just wanted to die at some points. And what I found on day 2 and 3 was that even though you're with your friends, you know, sometimes you split up, few people walking ahead, few people walking behind. but really you're alone and it's just yourself and you are doing a walking meditation for the whole period of the hike. And I realized that because your brain just throws thoughts into your mind to try and protect you, such as, give up now. There's no reason you should be doing this. Like, you're sick, you can't be doing this right now. And this is just your brain trying to protect you, right? But because it's extremely hard and your brain doesn't want to do hard things, and you are doing this extremely hard thing the whole day for 8 days in a row, and these thoughts are doing their absolute best to stop you from doing what you're doing, which is this huge challenge. Because realistically, I didn't need to be doing it for my survival. And that's the only way my brain sees it, So the hardest thing was, one step at a time, putting one foot in front of the other foot and, resisting or allowing these thoughts to just fall away while I'm trying to actually hike and as well take in my environment, because it was such a beautiful place that I was in, So if you want to hear more about this ego battle and this ego trip that I went through that kind of essentially redefined who I am, then I have a whole 30-minute podcast on that particularly, and we shot it with the Matterhorn in the background at the end of the hike with my friend Alex. So you can check that out, and I'll pop the link to that in the description below as well. But to keep it a bit more brief, basically, the hardest thing was that you're battling with your mind. You're battling with yourself every single step of the way. And let me tell you, your mind is not on your side. It's doing its best to try and stop you from doing the thing that you're trying to do. Every local we came across and every hotel we stayed at, they told us how extremely lucky we were with the weather, because it was beautiful, bright blue skies and almost no clouds in the sky. Basically, because it was towards the end of the season, a lot of the places we were staying in, it was the last night that they were even open, So day 4 rolls around and everyone's in their own world. A few people are walking ahead, a few people walking behind. We all have our earphones in, like we're just listening to music. We're in the zone. Sometimes you're talking to people and walking with people, but for the majority of that day, we were just walking by ourselves. And a couple of the boys went very far ahead, and about 3/4 through the day, there was a huge cliff face which we were going around, and for about 1 kilometer there, you're literally just hanging onto the cliff, and it's about 1/2 a meter, and all you do is look down, and you are so scared because if you slip, you are dead. There is no question about it. It is one slip, instant death. And a lot of the days had long stints that were like this, but this day was the first day that we came across one that was quite terrifying, really. So a few of the boys had gone ahead and they'd finished the hike, gone down a gondola. So it was me and my friend George, and behind us was a friend, and behind him was another friend, just walking by themselves. And George and I had made it through this crazy rocky area, and we're on the other side, having a little bit of a snack, took our bags off, taking some photos of the Weisshorn, the largest mountain in Switzerland, which was stunning. And so about 30 minutes went by, and the last friend, Josh, came through, and we were like, "Where's Lockie, the middle friend?" And he was like, "Oh, I haven't seen Lockie. What are you talking about? I thought he was with you guys." And so we were like, "That's no worries. We'll wait a little bit. No doubt he's just behind him." And then a huge group of tourists came through as Josh left to finish off the hike. Then this large group of hikers comes through that George and I had seen before, and we asked them, yo, have you seen our friend? You know, like he should have been in front of you. And pretty much all of them had seen him when we were walking prior to that, but none of them had seen him then. They were all like, no, there was nobody on that hike. You know, you couldn't even overtake anybody because it was only 1 kilometer of like rocky cliff faces, so they absolutely didn't see him. And we're like, okay, that's weird. So we'll wait another 20 minutes or so to see where he's at. This is taking me back to that day, telling this story, and just how crazy it was. So we're starting to get a little bit worried now, and the rest of the guys have gone down to the base of the mountain, gone down the gondola. They're worry-free, drinking beers, and it's just me and George waiting for Lockie. And George drops his bag, runs back on the side of the cliff face, is looking over the side of it, comes back to me. That was about 30 minutes, and no Lockie. He said Lockie is not there at all. And so we had no idea what to do except wait for him, but we had already been waiting for him for like an hour and a half at that point. So we decided to make our way down the mountain because he must have passed us, right? So we're going down the mountain, it's super steep, and we've got about an hour left, and it's just me and George, and we're in our own heads about this situation that has come up, and we're like, what could have happened to him? There is nothing that could have happened to him. Either he's passed us or he's dead. We're starting to get really worried at that point. And we finally get down to where the gondola was, and Josh was there. We tell him, hey, you've seen Lockie, right? And he was like, no, haven't seen Lockie, what's going on? And that's when the panic really started to set in. And I decided to go down the gondola because I was still sick at this point. I just wanted to rest my head and sit down for a little bit. And George and Josh stayed up the mountain to wait for Lockie. Afternoon was upon us, and you know, we couldn't even communicate with George. And so he sat up there, he managed to get a hold of this Swiss guy and get his phone. And it was at this point that we decided it's time, we have to call a helicopter, which would have been at least $20,000 out of pocket to actually launch the helicopter to look for our friend Lockie. But we were hopeless at this point. We had no idea where he was. He should have come down. We didn't see any other paths, and we were lost for words. We just didn't know. We didn't know what to do, so we were doing what we thought was the right thing to do. So George got on the satellite phone, and he called up the emergency center from a few towns away, which is where we were finishing our hike, and they began to get the helicopter ready. And so we're sitting at the bottom of the gondola, also super worried. We haven't heard an update. We're hearing helicopters fly around all over us, and we were kind of coming to terms with the fact that our friend was dead. It wasn't until about 3 seconds before the helicopter was about to launch that Lockie came strolling down the hill with a big smile on his face, and he had just taken a different path. So finally we see that gondola coming down to the cafe in the little town, and we see our friend's little face on it, and it's Lockie, and he's alive. And the wave of relief that just came over us was like nothing else. And it really put a lot of things into perspective for us, that we're taking things for granted, you know? We're all just walking on this hike, so happy-go-lucky, like you guys a couple of Ks ahead, you guys a couple of Ks behind, nothing really matters. And that was a really huge part of the hike that kind of really brought us all together. And then the next day was to be the hardest day. Anyway, huge shout out to our friend Lockie. You almost scared us to death that day, man, but we're glad you're alive, so. So day 5 rolls around and something happened that didn't really happen on the previous hike, and that was that our body kind of started to get conditioned to the hike, and our mind as well. And when I say our, I'm literally just talking about my own experience here. You know, your legs and your body, when you're walking 20 kilometers a day and you have an extra 20, 30 kilos on your back, you know, it's really quite tough. But after about day 4, day 5, you know, it was still pretty hard leading up to that point, but your body kind of adapts and it goes, oh, this is what we're doing now. Like, this is our life now. Basically, I had adapted to my environment. And that was really fascinating to see that your body and mind can adapt. And I was really starting to get the meditative benefits out of it, because all of the thoughts that I was having about my life, you know, and every role that I play in every situation outside of this thing, like, you know, as I said, like, it was like an 8-day meditation, and the fact that you have the time to just kind of go over every aspect of your life. Not that that's what I was intending to do going into the hike, but that's kind of what ended up happening, in that, you know, I have quite an active mind, and this is why I create a lot of art. I think a lot of people that create art, they do have a bit more of an active mind, and so they potentially can be a little bit self-aware, but that comes, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. And the curse is that you have so many thoughts on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of them are going to be negative. But this is why I'm saying it was quite meditative, in that the whole 8-day hike, I really could just go over and kind of take in my whole life as it was prior to this experience. You know, like, where was I, who was the type of person that I was, you know, who was the type of person that I was in relation to other people, how was I spending my time, how would I like to be spending my time, you know, what were my goals, but what could my goals be? You know, it really allowed me the time and the space to kind of reframe my existence as such. And, you know, meditation is one thing, but generally you're doing it in an environment that's familiar to you, and you can sit down and you can meditate, and then you come out of it and you're in that environment again. But when you're doing something like this, so challenging and so foreign to you that you've never done anything like this before, and you throw yourself into this situation that you cannot get out of, even if you have a horrible chest infection, and you just get to, or have to, analyze your life, and the facts of your existence just become so obvious to you, then there's nothing else like that I have experienced, because it's just all put right in front of you and you have to deal with it. You have no other option. You know, I thought I was going into an 8-day hike, but I was actually going into an 8-day therapy session as such. And it was especially hard because I felt almost alone in this huge battle that I was overcoming, where it just seemed like nothing to these other guys. You know, I'm sure they were struggling on different times, but I felt like I was struggling potentially more than some of them. And I didn't really vocalize it. I was just going through it all by myself and listened to music, and that really helped, and different podcasts, and that really helped. And, you know, I vocalized it a little bit because one of my other friends, you know, we have really deep chats. Shout out Alex. And in the last couple of days of the hike, we really went over some of these things, and it was great to bounce that off another person to kind of get another perspective on it, see if the thoughts that I'm having are right or valid, and, you know, analyze them, go over them a little bit. And the day that it all kind of came together, and it actually turned into more of a blissful meditation as opposed to a terrifying meditation, was actually my birthday. It was the 18th of September, and it was to be the hardest day of the hike. It was about 10, 11 hours, and this was the day that we got to about 7 hours. And, you know, we were done. We were fried from all of the days before, and the music festival, and the 5-day hike prior to that. We had 3 days left after this one. You know, we got to about the 7-8 hour mark thinking that this is where we needed to be, and we come across a sign, and the sign says, yes, it's only 20 minutes walk, but that sign was actually saying it's 20 minutes walk to the sign that tells you where the Rifugio was. And luckily enough, I had been through enough of those to realize, don't get excited because it might not be right. We finally get to the next sign. It says about 2 hours to the Rifugio. And the last 2 hours was literally like this. And this was also an instance where it was one slip, death. Almost that whole day, you know, you do not look down because you have one wrong footing and it's all over. You have 30 kilos in your back and you slip, it's done, it's all over. And we had already been through that whole thing with Lockie, and we didn't want any of that, so we're really focused. You know, a lot of the time we're just pulling ourselves up by rope, one person at a time, to get around a cliff face. It was crazy, but we finally did it. We got to the top, and the view from the top was stunning. We were in the top of the clouds, and we knew that we had a few days left after this, but it felt like the hardest part of the hike was over. And it was so relieving finally getting past, you know, that last hour was literally the hardest part of the whole hike. one step and you kind of have to have a break. And you take one more step and you have to have a break, and you're holding to the side of this cliff face. You take one more step, you're so out of breath and you have to have another break. And it was like that, trudging up basically vertical for about an hour. And I finally get to the top, and there was my friend George, and he hadn't said happy birthday to me all day. Not that I would expect that. And it was then that he says, "Happy birthday, Eamon." And everyone that knows George will laugh at that, because just the way he says it is so George. It's so intense. And after our 2-3 months of adventure so far, that was the thing that broke me. You know, it was my birthday. We just finished the hardest day of the hike, and I just burst out into tears, and I had to run up the stairs and take off my bag and just stand by myself for a minute because I was crying.
I'm not dealing with hungover.
How you doing, dude?
Going down. I'm fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. James, what do you have to say for yourself?
Pretty fucking happy right now, that's for sure.
Nice. What's up, dog?
Climb to the top of the Matterhorn. Look at that.
Lucky? What's it saying?
What?
We won. You say.
Conquered Dust Mountain.
We don't know where George is. Probably dead. That's fun.
But what I realized was that I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I was happy. And I was happy because, you know, even though we hadn't finished the hike, I'm doing something that I almost didn't do. That is the most challenging thing that I've ever done in my life. And it's allowing me to reframe my entire life and my perception on what I was capable of. And that's the most powerful thing that I've ever done. And I didn't even realize that it was possible, you know? So the next day we walked down from the Rifugio to Zermatt, which is the mountain town that sits below the Matterhorn. And the first thing that we did was went to McDonald's, and I got a vegan burger, and it was well deserved. Thank you, Switzerland, for having vegan burgers in McDonald's, because we don't have it here. And also got on the Wi-Fi, which was weird after 6 days of hiking. So that was day 6, and day 7 and 8 was walking up to another Rifugio and staying right by the Matterhorn, which is a really surreal experience. And that's where we shot that podcast, which will be in the description. So those last 3 days I was almost laughing to myself, you know. The vibes were really high, and you could tell that we had all just been through something really intense together. And there we were on the other side of it. And it wasn't until I got to shoot the podcast with my friend Alex and, you know, really be raw and authentic and kind of really dive into what we had just experienced, you know, from the start of day 1 in the Dolomite hike to then, which was the second last day of the hike. We had a huge Weiss beer in our hand. And I'll take this opportunity to give a shout out to everyone that was on that Europe hike with me. If I had time, I would thank you all individually, but you know who you are. Thank you for making that trip amazing and life-changing. I appreciate you so much. So in that final reflection, with the Matterhorn in the background, talking with my friend Alex, sharing a beer, reflecting on what we had just done, we realized that we were different people. And myself in particular, I got really excited because for the first time ever, I had really reframed my idea of what was possible and my idea of what I was capable of. And that got me really excited and really lit a huge fire in my stomach, because I knew that I could do anything I wanted. And I wouldn't be here sitting in front of this camera telling you this story if I hadn't done that, because I wouldn't think that I'm the type of person to do this kind of thing. You know, to talk about my experiences and to put it out on the internet, because that's not the type of person who I was. But I'm here with you today, a different person, because I've reframed my idea of what was possible. So what did I regret about this trip? Well, for starters, as you'll see, I regret not taking enough video, you know, capturing the moments that we're experiencing, because I'm a filmmaker, and being able to reflect on those, especially while making this video, is really fantastic, and it brings you straight back into that moment. And secondly, obviously, going to a 7-day music festival before an 8-day hike, don't ever do that. I don't like to give people advice, but don't ever do that, trust me. And finally, not saying yes more. That was the other huge thing that trip taught me, was that saying yes to a decision that seemed so little at the time, that I didn't even have these expectations of what was going to come to life on that trip. And then I found myself at the end of that hike, having no idea that I would be in that situation, having experienced those things, having felt those things, that I needed to say yes more. And not only to huge things, you know, just to smaller things. There's a lot of times in my life when, you know, a friend invites you out or something, and you're like, no, I'll just sit at home and do my own thing. I prefer to do that. It's less hard. You know, it's less challenging, but instead, if in those moments, you can get up and say yes, you know, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be a little bit challenging, there's a few obstacles I have to overcome, but you never know, because you might change your life on that night by just going out with your friend, or, you know, you never know, you might change your life by saying yes to going overseas with your friend. So that was a huge part that impacted me really greatly on that trip. Opportunities like these don't come around often. And again, whether they're small or they're large, they might not come around as often as you actually think. So when they arise, you need to grab them, you need to jump on them, you need to say yes and go and do them, because you never know when that opportunity might come around again, and you never know what that opportunity may lead to. You know, at the time, I couldn't even really afford it, but I jumped on it, and I would not be the same person today if I hadn't. So I guess that's it. I want to thank you for watching this video, because it was a really important one for me to make. And, you know, sharing the footage and sharing my experiences is something that's really hard to actually do, and to put into words and to actually express it out loud, because it was such a challenging experience. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and any like or subscribe below that you can do, any comment that you can do, really, really helps me out. And thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.